Why is it that no matter how much we read or listen to or pay attention to during the course of the day, we always, or almost always, have trouble recalling the information at a later date? This is incredibly important for schools if they are to truly prepare students to retain the knowledge and learn the skills needed to be successful in post-secondary employment opportunities. Hey everyone, Dr. Jones here with a new episode of Seeing to Lead. And this week, we talked to Mark Hirshberg, who is the author of the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. Now, while that's a great book, it's even more important to understand his app that he's created, Brain Bump. And that's just what we do in this episode. You see, Mark explains to us how the Brain Bump app provides just-in-time learning based on temporary georelevance. Here's the important piece of this. You see, the only way to excel at any kind of skill that we're trying to learn is to explicitly practice it. And now, add in space repetition, which is key for learning, and you have something to return students and ourselves to what we have learned, because it's only then that you can truly retain new information. You see, there's another way to do this too. If you think about what we're doing in schools, we just continue to add new programs, new initiatives, new curriculum, and we never get rid or change the old things. And so instead of streamlining this, what we're actually doing is we're creating more work and a diluted version of what we really need. So the way we can improve that is by cutting down the amount of content knowledge being transferred and increase the relevancy of that knowledge. Or, in other words, how we link it to understanding and wisdom. Now, this seems a lot, but Mark and I have a great conversation where he really explains this in a clear, straightforward manner. So once again, I thank you for taking the time to listen to another episode of Seeing to Lead and ask you, if you like what you hear, if you found value, please take the time, subscribe, rate, and review the show. It helps out more than you can imagine. Not to mention, it helps others benefit just like you. Now, enough from me. Let's listen to Mark talk about Brain Bump and how we can gain greater understanding on this week's episode of Seeing to Lead.
All of us have long sides and short sides, more than two. We often focus on the long sides. I work in tech. I need to keep up with the latest tech, and that is important. And do focus on the long sides. But if you're only focusing on the long side, you get long and thin, and you're a very thin rectangle with small area. If you focus on the short sides, the ROI, the incremental return for that effort makes you so much more effective, which is what our area is. So think about the short sides in yourself and in your team and recognize that putting in a little effort to address those can have a great return for you and your organization.
Dr. Chris Jones here, and welcome to Seeing to Lead, a show designed to help leaders increase their ability to effectively support, engage, and empower their staff through intentional practices so that they create an environment where everyone reaches their greatest level of success. On Seeing to Lead, communication rules the day as we hear voices from both teachers and leaders in an effort to examine perspectives, highlight misunderstandings, and provide steps to ultimately bridge the gap between what teachers need and provide through thoughtful dialogue. This show is about amplifying voices, creating understanding, and providing information to help everyone continually improve. I want to personally thank you for taking the time. Now, let's get to getting better. Mark Hirshberg is the creator of Brain Bump and the author of the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. Mark has spent his career launching and developing new ventures as startups and Fortune 500s and in academia. He helped to start the Undergraduate PracticeOpportunities program dubbed MIT's Career Success Accelerator, where he teaches annually. He also works with many nonprofits, currently serving on the board of Plant a Million Corals. I'm super happy to speak with Mark today because I'm always interested in new ventures and helping students and teachers succeed at their highest level possible. But on a personal note, because I listen to so many podcasts and read a lot, I'm really excited to hear about his app, Brain Bump. That said, Mark, welcome to Seeing to Lead.
Thank you for having me on the show. It is my pleasure to be here.
Well, I really think this is going to be great. And while I mentioned the idea of Brain Bump, and we are going to get to that in this show for personal selfish reasons maybe, but I'm also really interested in the idea of careers and how we're preparing students as they leave school for whatever they want to do, whatever field they go into, and choosing that field. And right now, I firmly believe that schools are not oriented to preparing students for careers that are not just available in the 21st century or the beginning part, but as we move forward. So how should we be talking about this or preparing them in education? If you could talk to us a little bit about that and, definitely explain your Career Toolkit book, that'd be great.
Schools are very misaligned to the educational needs of even some of yesterday, certainly today and tomorrow. If we look at the history of schooling, it's a relatively modern invention. We had early education, basic reading, writing, arithmetic, goes back 200 or so years, and we were just teaching people the basics. Unless you were elite, aristocracy, you were just learning really the basics. Once people started to move off the farms, we had to go a little further. And we just needed to make sure you could work in society, that you're able to go into a factory and count the number of screws and determine when you need to get more screws so you don't have to shut down the line. That's really all you need. It was still very basic, rote skills. And so our modern educational system was really designed for the industrial age. You did not need to know how to network to get a job on the assembly line. Leadership and communication were not important skills for those roles. Even when you go into the 1950s in corporate America, we were the cogs in the machine. You sat there and your boss said, "Here you go, do this." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Done, sir." In the outbox, "Sir, what next?" And you just had to do your task. It might have been accounting or mechanical engineering, but you were very rote. It wasn't until the latter part of the 20th century when we started to deconstruct the corporations. We saw a lot of layoffs in middle management. We started to reorient the structure of these companies that it was no longer strict command and control. In fact, if you think about today's world, you have a 23-year-old recent college grad in charge of social media and a 54-year-old chief marketing officer. And that 54-year-old says, "What's TikTok and how do we use it?" And looks to a 23-year-old to lead, to help drive the business. You're no longer the cog being told what to do by a supervisor who knows more. You're working in multifunctional groups with people with different knowledge and backgrounds. And so it is a different set of skills. You still need those fundamentals. It still helps to have read books and have the context and know basic science and understand civics. But there's additional skills, leadership, team building, communication, networking, negotiations, ethics that we are not teaching and we need to put into our educational system. That's the premise that began my work at MIT, where we heard companies were saying, we want these skills. We can't find them, not just in MIT students, not just college students, not just engineers. Universally, we want these skills and can't find it. And so we put together that program to give companies what they're asking for.
See, that's fascinating to me because I know that industry is asking for these skills and they keep pushing back on schools. But it seems like when you talk about schools are misaligned, it seems like schools and the school system are just even lost in how to go about it. When you mention these skills and being taught these skills, does that mean a course in these skills? Does that mean a class? Or do we thread it into the everyday curriculum with the content standards?
Very good question. And let's be fair to the system, which is that we keep piling on more and more. When I went to elementary school in the 80s, computers were first introduced. I remember learning Logo in roughly third grade. Years prior, you did not have computers. That was not something schools had to teach. And therefore, we just added additional work. We still had all the same math, science, history, English, plus new content, new materials. So I recognize we're asking more and more of the schools. And it's still important to do some of those basics like map reading. You and I are old enough that if we lose our cell phones and have to look at a paper map, we know what to do. But the younger generations, some of them are lost. And so we have to keep the old skills. We're adding more. And it's a question of how do you fit this in? I'm not opposed, by the way, to extending the amount of educational hours that we give children. In terms of these skills specifically, to the question you ask, is it additional or is it threaded throughout? I think the answer is yes. There should be some intentional focus. Let's talk about these skills specifically, but then we can thread into the other types of work that we do. So for example, you do some project-based work, certainly by middle school, high school, you're working in groups on a report, on some team project. And you can add into that, let's also do a small assessment. After you do your report, each one of you write up or talk about or do a presentation on the meta, on how the team functioned and who led and what worked and what didn't, to take what you maybe learned in a formal session, but reinforce it throughout the other work that you do.
You know, it's funny because when you talk about threading, I mean, the two things that jumped out at me right off the bat that made me chuckle a little bit is the map reading piece. In my main office, where students that come into school tardy, they stop at that front desk. Well, our clocks broke. And so the quick fix for the tech department was to hang an analog clock up behind the desk. And the students struggled with writing the time on their pass that we have them fill out to go to class. And I can imagine everybody listening to this kind of perk up when you say you're not opposed to extra hours during the school year to going to school. However, when you say that and then you talk about, explicitly discussing some of these skills and threading some of these skills, it's not so much the extra hours that would be burdensome because they would be meaningful and directed towards some of these things. And if we weren't able to do extra hours, because I don't see that passing anytime soon, to be honest, are there things we should be thinking about dropping when we're talking about traditional schooling? We still do quite a few things in the classroom that maybe we don't need. Do you have an opinion on that?
I do. Now, this varies state by state, what's included. Really start from the fundamentals and ask, why are we teaching this? I've had conversations with multiple teachers and administrators and asked, why do you teach this subject? And typically I get, I don't know, that's just what they tell us to teach. Someone decided it. But they can't tell me the why. Here's an example for my favorite subject, geometry. Now, most geometry teachers do actually know why we teach that. Many other teachers say, yeah, I don't know why. The math teachers like it. It's just part of math. Learn it, deal with it. But if you understand the lesson of geometry, it's not count the number of sides. We might start with that. But it's a concept of two-column proofs. And the idea that you can start with a given assumption and then derive logical steps to reach a new, presumably novel conclusion. And it's really teaching logical thinking. That's the lesson of geometry. But most teachers don't know that. And when you think about history, most teachers say, well, you need to know history. You have to have some context. But really what we're trying to teach are patterns. We're trying to teach interactions in the past so you can recognize those patterns and see how they might apply to today's society, or even understand why today's society is set up as it is. But we rarely get to that because we're so focused on just the knowledge transfer. So I would be okay with reducing the amount of knowledge transfer. I think back to how many days and hours we spent on learning about dinosaurs and the geological periods. I'm a STEM person. I only vaguely remember the details. But if you could tie it into, and here's the importance of understanding geological periods, And in fact, this is relevant today because we're talking about, are we in a new geological period? This is a big debate right now among certain scientists. That's relevant. And so I think we can cut down on the amount of knowledge, but increase the relevancy, increase how we link the knowledge to understanding and wisdom.
I'm glad you said that about the relevancy and looking at how we link it, because as you explained that, are we really, in a way, already doing this, but not explicitly? Because if we're teaching geometry, and so we're teaching logical thinking, using geometry as a vehicle almost. We're doing the same with history, with teaching patterns, but I think it's the rare student that realizes that. So when we think about, we have to change everything we're doing, maybe not so much. Maybe we just have to be more explicit.
It's fine to have the students spend most of their days wax on, wax off. But at some point, you have to explain to the student, this is why you're doing it, and here's how it actually applies to a practical use. Hopefully that reference isn't lost on some of the younger listeners.
Oh, I was just going to say, what a fantastic reference. Your stock just went so far up with me that you use that as a reference. That's fantastic. So when we're doing that, back to serious now that we made our little joke about the reference. So the Career Toolkit, how does this help with that? How does this outline that, or does it?
It does to a somewhat limited extent. Here's the thing about these skills. When you learn math or history, there's a lot of just information you have to have. I remember memorizing the times tables. You just kind of have to do that. And then you start learning more advanced rules about algebra, and you learn priority of operations, and you put these rules together and you solve more and more complex mathematical problems. Great thing about the rules is they always work. When it comes to these skills, what most people call soft skills, I like to call them firm skills, there's no hard and fast rule. Consider something like always hire people smarter than you. I definitely try to do that. You know more than me in some area. Great. You can do something I can't. But if I were running a fast food restaurant, I don't need someone smarter than me on the fryer. In fact, I probably want someone who might not be that smart because they're going to think this is boring. I'm going to go find a better job. So every rule has an exception. The key to learning these skills, it's more akin to learning a sport or a musical instrument. You have to do. You can learn a little in the classroom or from a book like mine, but then you have to do it. But the book, I do lay out the parts of it. So the book, we have 10 chapters, 10 skills, and it comes again from what we've seen in different surveys, those done by MIT and other schools, by industry surveys. These are the skills companies are asking for. Each chapter has a mental shift, how to think differently about these skills than how most people traditionally do, concrete actionable steps people can take to do it, and then next steps to go further. And so the book lays all that out. But again, I can only teach you so much about swimming from a book on swimming. You have to get in the pool and do it. And this is critically important to these skills.
And so, and full disclosure, because I'm waiting for it to arrive, I haven't read it yet or gone through it, but I know it's got the 10 chapters. It's a good length it just clocks in just under 300 pages. Is there a way to utilize it? Is there a way for leaders to utilize it through maybe some staff professional development to bleed it down into the classrooms to the students?
100%. First, by the way, even though it is 270 pages, I note you don't have to read it cover to cover. You can say, I want to develop my networking skills, and go right to chapter 8, skip chapters 1 through 7. Each chapter mostly stands alone. I say mostly because these skills do build on each other, and there is some crossover, but you can read it in any order that's accessible. I have on the website that we'll give you at the end of the show a number of free resources you can download, you can use them, which includes the Career Toolkit Professional Development Program. You can download this, and it tells you how to take the book, chop it up, whether you just say 1 chapter, 2 chapter, 3 chapter, or parts of the chapter to do training. We have companies that use this for their internal corporate training. And there are different approaches. For example, we have an onboarding segment that's, I think, about 6 cycles. It says, read these pages, and then next week, those pages, next week, these others. And over 6 weeks, you will get, here are the skills that are most relevant as you join a new company. And so you can take the book and chop it up to use it for different types of skills you're trying to build, whether your faculty development or to go down into the student level and develop it among students. The key thing, though, we said with these skills, it is about practice. So it's not just go read it, best of luck. It's done much like a reading group. And this, by the way, is how we teach it to the students at MIT. We have them do something, or in this case, you'll have them read something, and then get into a group discussion. Because it's in that discussion, the exploration, that it matters. Because as we're talking about leadership, you're going to have a different perspective than I am. I'm going to say, I never thought of it that way. And I might not agree. I might not want to take your approach, but it's important to understand that is a valid approach, and not everyone will see leadership the way I do. Whereas everyone should see 1776 as the same date with the same significance. There's no debate. But these are more subtle and multifaceted.
That's absolutely fantastic. And I really like, now you're talking about resources that are incredibly valuable, right? You're talking about a book that you can take what you need from it when you need from it, whichever chapter is what you're looking for. That's fantastic. And the idea that you have a whole professional development plan laid out on your website, which we'll mention afterwards, and I'll link that up in the show notes. I think resources like that are fantastic to have. And now we just need leaders who are bold enough or maybe courageous enough to put them out and work with their staff so that they actually do bleed into the classroom. Supporting your teachers and students seems to be a struggle. They just don't seem to be engaged. You wish they would take more responsibility for their learning and culture of the building, but they just don't seem to be empowered enough to do it. So, my question is, have you checked out the book Seeing to Lead yet? It's all about creating a true educational experience where learning, growth, leadership, and community take center stage. Full of strategies and resources, Seeing to Lead is about attaining that goal by employing a model that supports, engages, and empowers all individuals to become leaders themselves. Pick up a copy today at seeingtolead.com. That's seeingtolead.com. Remember, you don't become a leader and then decide you need to support and recognize others more than yourself. It is the moment you realize it's about supporting and recognizing others that you become a leader. Seeingtolead.com.
Here's another relevant resource. I think most schools get career planning wrong. When you talk to your students, traditionally what we do is we bring in the parents. Tommy's mom is a doctor. She's going to talk about being a doctor. Do you want to be a doctor? Yes or no? Jenny's dad is an accountant. Do you want to be an accountant? Yes or no? And that's when we look in these very binary ways. And people think they know what the job is. Well, everyone knows what a doctor is. We see it on TV. You take care of sick people. But if you actually talk to a doctor about what they do, they complain they don't take care of a lot of sick people. There is a lot of paperwork administration. They only get a few minutes with people. They have to do lots of forms, regulations. They manage a business. They have to think about getting new patients. They have to hire and manage staff. They have to deal with the finances. That's what being a doctor is today if you're in private practice. Now, if you go into research, well, then it's something totally different. You might not be seeing patients, but you're more in the lab, more of one, less of another. We need to talk about jobs with children, not as this is a job in a binary, do you want this job, yes or no, but break it down into components and break it down to, in this job, I do a lot of travel. The upside is I get to fly to lots of cities. The downside is I don't get to see my family as often. Do you want a job with travel, yes or no? And so when you break it down to, I have a physics background, so I think about unit vector components. Okay, I want a job that has this amount of travel and this much in with new people and maybe lots of work with spreadsheets and very few meetings. And then you say, what job comes closest to doing this? And that's going to give you a better indication than just, this sounds cool. And I have a set of questions. They're in the book. It's also another free download on the website. Here are questions to ask people. So when you bring in the parents or other people to talk about their jobs, get into, let's talk day in, day out. How many people you're going to hear will say, yeah, I spend way too much time in meetings. You're going to train the students. Ask, are there a lot of meetings? Maybe that's not the career I want.
Yeah. It's funny because with this innovation career pathways that we do at my school currently, when we're asking students what career pathway they want to go into, it's always really interesting because we're pushing down into the earlier grades before they decide to go into a pathway, the different interest inventories and job clusters. So that through one of our programs that we use, they ask them different questions and they look at the different aspects of what they're interested in before they show them a job cluster of different types of jobs that they may want to go into because of their interests. So that's really important. Although I'm thinking, as you're talking, I'm thinking of all, being a visual person, I'm thinking of all the different graphs that you could use to really get across, I want this amount of meetings, I want this amount of travel, like a pie chart type deal. But that kids might be more interested in than just sitting there looking at it.
Exactly. You could make it really fun. You could probably turn it into some type of game.
I'm absolutely sure that you could. So talking about a lot of information, let's shift gears for a minute if we can. You've got Brain Bump, this app, and the idea of how many podcasts I listen to, audiobooks, reading, I always want to retain more than I do, just speaking from a personal standpoint. I retain some. I've got different note-taking strategies. I've got different memory strategies, but I always want to retain more and find myself sometimes saying, I know I heard this somewhere, but I can't remember. So it's a failure of my note card system, or it's just I'm not remembering because I've got a lot of information. How does Brain Bump help with things like that? Because I could see it being very useful to students with multiple courses.
Let's dive a little more into the problem first. And I had all these problems myself and found I wasn't the only one. Some of it is, I know I read this somewhere, but I can't remember the details and I wish I could find it. But you mentioned as well, you have a note-taking system. Often do you go back and look at those notes?
Not as often as I should. That's part of the problem. I'm a huge margin note person, but how often do I flip through the book again?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're a professional educator. Right. You are more competent at this than most of us, and you understand the theory behind it. But this is true. We may take notes, but we don't go back and look at the notes. And we all know spaced repetition is key. It doesn't work if you're missing that repetition part of it.
Right.
Now, students often are a little better because they have a forcing function. They have a test. And I remember studying the hot words for the SATs because there was a very clear outcome for that. As adults, we don't have that. And we listen to podcasts. We read books. We go to webinars. We take in all sorts of information, but rarely do we take notes on it. Most people don't take notes on their books or podcasts. And even if they do, they don't look back. That is a problem because it makes it very inefficient. So the key was not the recording. There's a bunch of tools out there to let you record notes. The key was the accessibility. In theory, if I'm on Kindle and I highlight things, well, I have access to it. I just have to find the right Kindle document and Control F and go through it and find it. But if that's 30 seconds, and 30 seconds is probably being generous, if it's 30 seconds or more, I'm not going to do it. It's too costly. So the key was finding a way for there to be a low cost, meaning time. This is a free app, low cost information retrieval. And that was the premise of Brain Bump. We have a patent on this. So the first one just got issued a few months before this recording. Here's how it works. We take the key ideas from books, blogs, podcasts, classes, talks. We put it into the app. So it's like a series of flashcards, but typically not question answer. Just here's the answer. Here's the piece of information you want to know. They are not organized chronologically. They're organized by topic. So they have, think hashtags from social media. They just have the topics with them. You can use it in one of two ways. The first is just-in-time access. So, for example, if you are walking into a conference and you read my book, you're thinking there's all these great networking tips. I read it 2 months ago and I can't remember any of them. As you're in the lobby of the conference or you walk off in the corner, you open the app, you tap networking as the topic, and all those tips come up right there in front of you. You flip through it in a few seconds. All right, here are the icebreaker questions. Oh, remember to do a firm handshake or whatever the tip happens to be. Now I can do it. So you're getting it just as you need it. You're getting relevancy. The other usage mode is what I refer to as passive spaced repetition. Again, there's no test. So you're not saying I have to spend 10 minutes a day doing this. Think about daily affirmations or daily Bible verses that some people like. We took that idea, but do it with the content from the source that you're reading. So imagine if you just got promoted, you're a new school administrator, you're trying to be a better manager, so you're reading a book on management. And by the way, your marriage is on the rocks. You're also reading a book on how to fix your marriage. So what if every day, you don't even need to open the app. Every day at 9 a.m., you set it up so you get a management tip. By seeing it over and over, spaced repetition, it's going to sink in, it's going to stay top of mind. And by the way, at 5:45 p.m., you get the marriage tip. So when you walk in the door a few minutes later, that's top of mind. And again, the idea is that it is geotemporally relevant because a marriage tip at 9 a.m. you'll forget before the end of the day. And the management tip at night, you're going to forget by the next morning. So it's getting you the information you need when you need it.
That sounds as close to the magic pill as you can get.
Yeah.
So just a question about that, though. You talk about how you have access to all these books and this information in these books and podcasts. How do those get into the app? Is that something that's already loaded into the app? Is that something I need to load in if I'm using the app?
Good question. This is 100% free. There are apps out there like Blinkist, where they're going out. They have a team that will summarize books and give you the summary. But of course, you're seeing the summary once. You're probably not going back. So you're likely to forget the summary too. And they will charge you because they have an army of people reading the books on your behalf. We do everything completely free. There's no ads. We don't take your information. So we work with the content providers. By the way, the authors hate Blinkist because they feel you're not even summarizing my book right, and now you're killing my brand. So if you are an author, a podcaster, a course instructor, take your IP and put the key takeaways you put into the app. It's now available for anyone on the platform for free. We did add in the 2.0 release that came out some months back. If we don't yet have the content you want, which let's face it, there's a lot more content out there in the world than we yet have, you can add your own manually in the app. You can add your own notes. Those will only be visible to you. So you can either enter them one at a time. Currently, at the time of this recording in spring of 2024, we can also import your Kindle highlights. So if your Kindle highlights, you can import that and turn those into tip cards. We'll be adding more ways to take existing legacy notes and importing them into the app. Now, I note that once you as a content creator put your content on there, the tips for my book, they're in there. And you don't have to buy the book to get them. You can get them for free. If you want to do it in a way that limits it, that's a feature we're looking at in the future where it's restricted to certain groups. And we're going to roll that out at some point, TBD. If you're interested in that, you can talk to me about what you're looking for because we're still trying to refine that feature.
That sounds absolutely fantastic because that was my first question. So what if you don't have what I'm looking for? But so as an author, as a podcaster myself, would I be able to load up tips from my book? Would I be able to do a feed so that it picks up my podcast? How does
100%. You as the content owner, author of the book, host of the podcast, you can choose to put the tips from your content onto the app. And I hope you do. And I know the listeners hope you do so they can remember all these great tips. And that's available for everyone. Existing listeners who want to remember it, new people who might be on the app and saying, what's this? It looks interesting. So it can help expand the brand. By the way, for the content creators, the benefit to them, how do we get them to do this? And we don't charge them either. It's free for them. Everything is hyperlinked back. So it helps build their brand. Many people who have books and podcasts typically are service providers trying to sell some higher end service. Well, you can't get people to buy your service if they don't remember you. So all the tips come branded with the cover art for the book or the podcast and links back to the website or even the show. And this is great for both parties because the app user says, hey, this is a great tip, but I want to go a little deeper. And they can click through to that podcast episode or to that blog post. And for the IP owner, you're saying, this is great. We're driving people to my back catalog, that evergreen content, that great advice from 3 years ago that still applies because it's evergreen, but no one looks at because it was 3 years ago. And because most systems are set up chronologically, we're driving traffic there. So it's a win for all parties. And if you're an app user and you're saying, I wish this content was there because I don't want to enter it myself, go nudge that content creator and say, hey, you should put your book on this app because it's really cool and I'd love to see your stuff. We want to get more and more content on the app to really just help as many people as we can.
That's an absolutely fantastic idea. And I love the two pieces to it, the just-in-time access and the passive space repetition that helps get it when you need it. Because hence the old notebook on the nightstand thing. When you think of something that you want to remember, I almost said victim, but it's not because I'm a victim. It's because I don't do it. But I'm such a bad actor when it comes to, I've got this idea. It came to me, it's in the later afternoon or early evening when I'm a little tired, maybe a little punchy. So the creative juices are flowing a little bit more rather than the hard analytical stuff. And I don't write it down. And then I say, I'll get it after. And then 2 hours later, I'm like, what the heck was I thinking about? And I don't remember it. So it's of no use to me. It was a good thought. Well, at least I thought it was a good thought, gone awry. So no, that's a really good thing. I love the stuff you're talking about the Career Toolkit and how we go about educating students or careers and the brain bump thing. I can't wait to talk to more people about that. But as we wind up the podcast, I've got two questions I ask everybody. The first one is, if you weren't in education, who, not what would you be?
I am lucky to have 1 foot in education and 1 foot outside of it. I am, to be fair, the same thing in both, which is someone who is trying to make the world better. I do it through some of my teaching, whether it's stuff I do at MIT or through the book or using the app to help others teach, but also to help make the world better. My day job, I do a lot of cybersecurity work. How do we make the world safer? So I'm fortunate that I get to say yes and do both.
I love the way you put that. Yes, and. We always talk about wanting to say yes and to things that come up, and it looks like you're doing that with your life. So that's a good thing. The final question is, you've talked about two main things, but there have been a lot of different themes that have come out in that. What's the most important piece of advice you would give to leaders as they work to better support, engage, and empower those they serve?
Watch The Karate Kid, the original, if you haven't seen it, so you can get the reference earlier.
Yeah.
But I would say, when you think about these skills, you want to develop these skills not just in yourself, but in your whole team or organization. Imagine if your whole group got 3% better at teamwork, at communicating, at leading, at negotiation, which often negotiations happen internal within organizations. It's not sales outside. It's people having conflicting ideas. If you just got a couple % better at any of these, the impact is huge. And I'm going to leave you with an analogy that I use to open the book. This comes from my friend, Professor Charles Leiserson. We're going to actually do a little bit of math which I know your teachers will love because we're an educational podcast. Imagine you have a rectangle that's 4 by 10. You want to increase one of the sides by 2 units to maximize the area. Now, if you need to pause the podcast to think about it a moment, feel free. Now that you're back, the answer is that we increase the short side from 4 to 6 units to get 60 instead of 48. Conceptually, what we're doing is we're taking those 2 extra units, putting them on the short side so they're amplified by the long side. If we put on the long side, it's amplified only by the short side. All of us have long sides and short sides, more than 2. We often focus on the long sides. I work in tech. I need to keep up with the latest tech, and that is important. And do focus on the long sides. But if you're only focusing on the long side, you get long and thin, and you're a very thin rectangle with small area. If you focus on the short sides, the ROI, the incremental return for that effort makes you so much more effective, which is what our area is. So think about the short sides in yourself and in your team and recognize that putting in a little effort to address those can have a great return for you and your organization.
Just that last 30 seconds was like price of admission for the whole episode. That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for everything. Mark, you've said some really important things and some great things to reflect on. If somebody wants to get in touch with you for more information, if somebody wants to follow up with anything, what's the best way to do that?
I'm going to give you 2 websites because there is the book and the app. For the book, the website is thecareerbook.com. On that website, you can learn more about the book, download those free resources we talked about. I don't even ask for your email because I've got nothing really to sell you. Just download it using good health. You can follow me on social media. You can read articles I put out every week, and you can get in touch with me through that website. All of that is at thecareertoolkitbook.com. If you're interested in the app, go to brainbumpapp.com. Now, BrainBump you can find in both the Apple and Android stores, completely free, but at brainbumpapp.com, you can learn more about the app, follow links to the stores. There's an explainer video, 90 seconds. It shows how the app works. And if you're interested, if you happen to be an author, a speaker, or have other IP that you'd like to get on the app, at the bottom of the page, there's a form you fill out to say, here's what I have. I'd love to be in touch about getting my content on the app, and let us know. And all of that is at brainbumpapp.com.
Absolutely fantastic. People heard it, they'll see it in the show notes, and I will put links there so that it's all hyperlinked so they can just hit it and get right there when they're looking at the show notes. So it'll make it nice and easy. Again, Mark, I know I said this, but I can't thank you enough. You've said some fantastic things. You're doing great things, and you're sharing it for the betterment of everybody. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us today.
Thanks again for having me, and thank you everyone for your time.
Well, that's a wrap, but not the end. Next step, be sure to take action on something you heard here today. Hey, thanks for listening to the Seen to Lead podcast. If you would like to connect for any reason, email me at drchrissj@gmail.com or catch me on Twitter at Dr. C.S. Jones. If you've gotten any value from the Seen to Lead podcast today, you can help me and other leaders create a world-class environment through a teacher-centric approach by subscribing to the show, leaving an honest rating and review, and sharing this episode on social media with your most valuable takeaway. Also, one last thing. Have you had a chance to pick up my latest 5-star rated book yet? Grab your copy of Seeing to Lead anywhere you buy books or at seeingtolead.com. That's seeingtolead.com, where you can learn more and continue to improve. Now go have a successful week.